What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It is another edition of Cuts and Covers, your favorite podcast to geek out on the process of women's basketball sports writing. This is for the ball knowers on Substack and a first little snippet for the folks everywhere else. And for that, we had to go to one of the foremost women's basketball feature writers in the game right now, the future author of the authoritative texts on the history of women's basketball. Her name is Emma Baccellieri, and she is with Sports Illustrated. Emma, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. That's quite the intro. Thanks.
You know, we're all about pomp and circumstance here at No Cap Space. You know, a little bit of theatrics never hurt anybody. I'm glad you're on. I'm so happy to have you on with us. I would probably say you're not a women's basketball fan in the world if you haven't read one of your features at the very least that's been, pumped out over the course of the last year or two. I guess just as a jumping off point, I'm curious how much the growth of women's sports and women's basketball has impacted your sports writing, because it feels like the features have only gotten bigger coming from you lately. We have the Indiana Fever Caitlin Clark piece that opens up the WNBA season, Mylasia Fulwiley, and that piece was done right as they're going to go to the Final Four. It feels like the splash has kind of been in there. What's the last year been like for you?
Yeah, it's been huge. I mean, candidly, so I've been at Sports Illustrated for about 7 years, but I wasn't hired to cover women's sports 7 years ago. That wasn't something that a lot of huge media organizations were willing to put full-time resources behind. So I was hired to cover baseball, which, I loved and I still love and had a lot of fun doing. But I kind of just, for the first couple of years I was there, was fitting in whatever, I mean, women's basketball specifically, but women's sports in general, whatever coverage I could fit in around, basically my day job and my regular uh, responsibilities. And, finally, over the last couple of years, it's been really heartening to see, as the whole world has seen how much there is here, that my bosses and the higher ups also saw that and were willing to put more resources behind, not just kind of letting me do more of what I wanted to here and really starting to focus a little more on women's basketball full time, but also the resources it takes to do something like a cover shoot, video coverage, really recognizing this is a place where it's the right thing to do and there are great stories here and you're going to get great coverage from it, but also you get a return on investment here because people want to read this. And this is still, even as it's grown so much, there's still unmet demand there that, people are going to read this because they want to read whatever they can here. And there still isn't enough, I think, serious, thoughtful coverage of it, which obviously the media industry as a whole is contracted. There are other reasons for that.
Yeah,
But yeah, just being able to do that over the last year, 2 years has been really heartening. I've learned a lot. And it's just, I can't think of a more fun time to be in the space than what we've seen over the last year.
It's pretty cool because it's not just women's basketball, it's a women's sports thing. The rating returns for the College World Series, the Women's College World Series, mind you, have been incredible. The volleyball women's NCAA tournament numbers were incredible in the fall. There's news that Major League Baseball is trying to get involved with Athletes Unlimited and have a professional softball league. And the kind of funny point I've been making about this lately is capitalism has extracted basically everything from men's sports, and now it sees the gold rush on the women's side and is oh my God, exponential growth. Let's go attack that. But the funny thing that feels beneficial for us is media people and writers that enjoy the game and the stories that we can tell is there's now this much more open realm to be able to do it. And like you mentioned, the sell to say there is an audience for a cover story on this is a lot easier than it was a couple years ago. And so it's interesting on that end, the storytelling opportunities that arrive, as well as all of the attention that comes in. Is there a little bit of I told you so that you have to hold in as a writer? When editors are oh, can you do this? And you're could have done it 2 years ago, but that's okay. We'll do it now.
Yeah, I mean, there totally is. And then the flip side of that also is that I know there are people that I didn't really get into women's basketball until I was in college. There are people who have been around this space so much longer than I have, that have been here for decades and decades doing this work, that I can feel I told you so a little to people who are saying things now, and there are people who might think like I told you so about people who showed up 5 years ago, like I did, or even 10 years ago. Um, but I try to take it with like it's just great that people are here, and I think that comes with growing pains, obviously across a variety of different levels. But
Mhm.
it, yeah, I certainly feel that twinge sometimes, especially like thinking of times where I've, a couple years ago having to fight so hard for something that is so relatively small. Like actually, you brought up the Women's College World Series. I went for the first time 3 years ago, and
Mhm.
that was something I had to really fight for. And now it's like obvious with the growth potential in softball that it's huge, and that like this is something that people click on, people read, people watch. It's remarkable how fast it's changed, but it's mostly just it's great that so many of those little battles don't exist in the way that they used to, and it's like fun to have more energy for bigger battles.
Totally. And what's cool is that while there is more attention around it, there is a nice component of having had a foothold in. So there's a rapport or at least some degree of familiarity that you may have with teams and agents and coaches. Admittedly, easier on the college end than the WNBA. We're getting there. We're gonna get there one day. But I'm very curious for you when it comes to looking at features because there is so much more attention coming from other publications and other feature writers now that want to get involved in the space and see the well of stories and storytelling that really hasn't been touched in the way that other publication or other sports, I guess, have had it through their publications. What's the experience just kind of been like realizing that a line is kind of starting to form around some of these stars or players or coaches that wasn't already there in the first place? And when you're going in and trying to pitch features, how do you kind of position yourself? Is it like a stack of papers on the table of like every feature I've written in the last 3 years? Yes, I am here. I am her. You got to give me this interview right now.
Not quite like that, although I would love to be that confident and go in with that approach. But yeah, I mean, in general, I try to like operate in the framework of the more the merrier. It's great if there
Mhm.
are more people trying to tell these stories, bigger outlets, bigger, mainstream organizations outside of just sports media. Like that is great. I want as
Mhm.
many people as possible to read about Nafisa Collier and Asia Wilson and Caitlin Clark. Like that is great. Uh, but yeah, when it comes to then like how do I still try to get the access that I would like to do the kind of writing I would like to do, the biggest thing for me is just focusing on what I can bring that might be different. And so for one thing, when I'm talking about the print magazine, like there just aren't that many of those anymore. And that
Yeah.
is something that still does mean quite a bit to people to be able to know this is something I can hold in my hands, that this is laid out in a way for print that looks totally different than digital, that, that still is something that means something to quite a lot of people, I think, especially to agents and PR teams, but also to the athletes themselves. And so that's cool to be able to offer that and to say that's something different. And then going off of that, just like the care that you have in telling a longer, more thoughtful story like that, of just like the time that I would like to spend with the athlete, with the person around them, the time then that I am going to spend working on the story to make that shine in whatever way I can try to, just emphasizing kind of the care, the thoughtfulness that like that doesn't guarantee that something is going to blow up necessarily, but
Mhm.
would like to think a good feature, a good profile is going to show something about the person that they might not even know about themselves, and being able to offer that and to show like this is what I'm trying to do. Like here's why I would like to tell this story. Like what do you think basically? And kind of a lot of times letting them steer to some extent, like is there something you want to say? Is there something that like you think isn't being told here? Opening that aspect up of it
Mhm.
rather than coming in with like here's exactly what I'm trying to do, but rather like what is the story you want to tell about yourself. Not in a way where they're like dictating the coverage, but just like what
For
is
sure.
interesting to you, what do you want to talk about. And yeah, just like opening that door, basically showing like what I can offer to some extent and seeing where it goes from there. And sometimes you still get no, like a lot of the times you
Mhm.
still get no, but
Yeah.
sometimes you get yes, and that's really great.
Does the prestige of SI still resonate with the kids? Because I feel like with agents and coaches that are older that remember SI, like even our age group, like I remember SI for kids. Like that's how I got into women's basketball was Lisa Leslie and DT being on those covers. Does like a 17-year-old who's like very ensconced in like Gen Z or Gen Alpha media still have like a name brand understanding of what SI is or was?
Not exactly,
Mm.
and that is a weirder thing to have to deal with, like, I'm
Yeah.
30, so I don't feel like I'm that old, but it's like, "Oh, no, there is a clear generational divide
For
here of
sure, yeah.
what, my experience of a print magazine in childhood was versus people who have never held one." So it's definitely changed, obviously, like, it's a whole other podcast of the struggles SI has had over the last couple of years and what's added to that. Um, but I found that even among people who maybe don't have that, like, brand association of SI of, "Oh, like, here are the specific issues I remember, here's what it used to mean to me," even for kids, for high schoolers, for younger college kids who don't have that, like, the idea of being in print is still cool, that the like, it's kind of done
Mhm.
a circle back around where because it's such a relative rarity at this point, like, people tend to think that's cool even if they don't think of SI specifically as cool, so to speak. So yeah, it's definitely different than it was, to talk to people who have been here a long time, like 30 years ago. You wouldn't have to sell SI, but it's a fun
Mhm.
challenge to have to do that.
That's kinda interesting though that, like, there is still and we've seen it too, like, that there is a desire still for something tangible, like, something you can still hold in your hand regardless of what the name of it is. Like, slam covers still feel like they have that kinda
Yeah.
resonance.
No, totally. And I think it's just because we don't get that much of that anymore, that like
Mhm.
when you're scrolling on your phone, everything feels the same. But like, yes, a slam cover, seeing people get print treatment in the New York Times, like any of
Mhm.
that, like it feels really good to hold something like that and being able to experience it in a way that's like, this is not just another thing I'm moving past on a screen. Like this is real.